Love and Metaxa. I tasted you at 16 when my cousin died of cancer. Everyone had hollow eyes like the depth of empty jars. Months, years, Uncle G was the one who didn't speak. He swallowed too much death in his ancient bloodline. Before the age of 23, silent death. I tried you, funeral 1, you said hello from the bottom of a tiny shot glass, while film reeled at your wake. Dead first cousin, first of first in the coffin, yellow copper skin, tubes and ICU rooms. I cannot drink away, Metaxa. I embraced you while dancing Greek, knees dirty on the ground, with hands in the air, mouth around your home, clapping beats in the air. You warmed me up, made all the pain dissipate. Seconds, minutes, heat, waves took deep-rooted hurt away. Go, 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 put your lips on me, girl. I lifted you, brown neck exposed, silent paths to your taste, flooding down, spinning barefoot, your entrance a secret winter lover. One lucid party after another, a memorial, one wedding, the Zorba dance, one more mechanical shot, 40 more days of customary darkness. Never cheers at a Greek funeral. There are crystal rules, knowing when to appear. Your ancient ghosts, kissing dried cheeks, charming nights as lovers do. An imaginary friend comforting me and making me sick. I vomited you up and backed out away until I dreamt of it more, to bring back our dead in one more shot. Go, go, go.
You're listening to Good as in the Details. I'm Gwendolyn Dolske.
And I'm Rudy Salo.
And you just heard poet, Canadian author, erotic romance writer, Christina Strigas read her poem, Love and Metaxa, from her collection of poetry, Love and Metaxa. And in this podcast, we have Christina to talk about her latest collection. We are also talking about writing in general, the writing process. What is her process? How have things changed since she started as writing? And the value of poetry, and a little bit about romance writing and the value of the romance novel.
And self-publishing. Christina is a well-known in self-publishing, and we discuss the merits of self-publishing. You know, she's done very well for herself by doing that. I mean, being rated in the top 100 of Canadian poets is not an easy feat.
And she has, I'll just say, she has an excellent Twitter feed. I'm going to link it to the show notes, because if anyone here is interested in writing, or if you just feel like being inspired, she has got a great, great Twitter account. She's also on Instagram.
You want to talk about The Fly?
Oh my God. That's right. While we were recording, I had a fly issue, and it ended up being part of the show.
Did my poem about the fly make it on the part of the show?
I think I kept it. I think I kept it in. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want people to realize that I'm a poet and I didn't even know
it. Well done, Rudy. Let's talk poetry.
First question for you is I know what Metaxa is. I know it's a Greek brandy. But let me just ask the obvious question. When you're speaking of Metaxa in this actual poem and in your book title, you are referring to the liquor, correct?
I am referring to the liquor. That's correct. Yeah. I mean, if you know anything a little bit about the Greek culture, Metaxa plays an instrumental, vital role in our traditions, because we usually drink Metaxa at weddings. And when we're dancing Greek in shot glasses while we're doing our zebekia, or, you know, that dance when we're one person, and you line them up and you use your mouth and you have a shot of Metaxa. We have them at funerals, at wakes. So when people come over to your house or somebody dies, we have to have Metaxa. We bring a bottle of Metaxa. So we're always have Metaxa in our house. People come over, want a little shot of Metaxa. It's a brandy. It's an amber spirit. It's like a liqueur. So that's
the first time you had it was at 16. Was it actually at 16?
It's actually when my cousin died of cancer at 23 years old. So that was my first experience with death and with Metaxa, and it has that whole connotation of, for me, when I think of it, of death. And there's so many people that have died. I was exposed to death at a really young age. I mean, for 16 was young for me when my first cousin died, and I was there and I went to it and I experienced it all. People crying, lamenting. I mean, it was just very traumatic for me. Throughout the good events, the bad events, there's always been Metaxa there, and it always soothed. And so that poem is a little bit of an ode to Metaxa, if you'd like.
Your work is so beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm almost speechless, because, which I'm not usually, but it's just that your work is so good, and I'm just,
I'm so touched. Thank you.
Moved.
Thank you.
Well, like I said, there's such a richness to your poetry. And how long have you been writing poetry? Is it something from when you were younger that is just part of your core? It's just part of who you are?
Really from young, when I was in high school, I started writing poetry. I started writing it in class, and people were telling me about their heartbreak and, oh, could you write me a poem for my boyfriend? And I would write them poems and then the girls or the boys would give the poems to their ex-boyfriend. I mean, it just started like that, and I started writing so many poems, and then in my journal, and I couldn't stop. It was just coming out of me, and I liked listening to people's stories about their heartache and their heartbreak, and then I would go into the first person. So I like writing in the first person, and a lot of the times when I write in the first person, I put myself in that person's place easily, and I'll write the poem. Even though you might think it's first person, it's me, it could be anybody else. So in this book, I did change it to third person a lot because I tried to actually use other form and techniques, not just first person narrative. So it could be a little bit different and experimental. So I did try different techniques in this book, which I hadn't done in my other books. And it's they're a bit more detailed and intricate as well. But when I was young, I mean, I would just write in my journals, and I wrote poetry from a young age. I was exposed to it from a young age as well in high school. And as well, I listened to lyrics and Jim Morrison, and I bought his albums, and I went to the library and I just started reading all the classics. Because back then there was not much. You just go to the bookstore. I mean, I'm 52. So you'd go to the bookstore or the library, and whatever classical poetry you would find. Right now, if you go to the bookstore, there's aisles and aisles, and there's so much poetry. But then it was the classics. You read the 18th century poets, 19th century Shakespeare. And then when I was older and I went to university and I studied English literature, I studied a lot of the poetry in class, analyzing poetry and in depth, right? That layers upon layers of poetry that I read. And that helped me grow as a writer as well, right? Because if I look back, I read what I wrote back then and it's so immature, and I think, oh, that's infantile. But I mean, I've evolved into a much better writer from back then, because when you write for 30, 40 decades, right? You just evolve and you change. And I find like back when I was younger, there was just my notepad and my notebook. That's it. There was nothing else. I would only write in journals. And now, of course, there's the internet. And that's the only way I actually exposed myself was the internet. Like in my 30s, when I started a blog and I started to share my poems, then I thought, oh, I'm actually good. Oh, you don't just think that you're terrible as a writer. You don't think that you're any good. At least even when I write something now and I'll reread it and I'll think, oh, that's not good. I could have done better.
Yeah, I think,
right?
Well, that's the imposter syndrome, I think, but that's actually a healthy thing. It's the person who thinks that they are flawless that is actually problematic. Because I think that when you recognize, or when you have that humility, then that gives you the opportunity to keep growing, to keep learning, to become a better writer. I know I do, like, I still have, as you can see, just notepad, pen. I have Post-it notes everywhere. In every purse, there's pen and paper. And I know a friend of mine wanted to write a book and was asking me about different programs you can use on the computer. This person had never written anything before. And I said, there's no computer program that will make you a writer. You literally just have to sit down and write. And to me, that's like somebody buying the exercise machine that doesn't actually make you fit. You have to just actually do the work. But I think I wanted to ask you something about the journaling. I was thinking about this for myself, that journaling versus the poetry is that, for me, I know personally, I journal as well, but there is something about crafting the emotion into a poem that somehow is more liberating and freeing. Like, I feel more healed after writing a poem, even good or bad, there is something about it that feels more healing than journaling. And then at the same time, the poem is such an exposure of your own inner self that I would imagine putting it out there, that you're in a way sharing something that's almost even more personal than a journal. Yeah. What do you think?
I think that when you're writing a poem, it's instant. It's like, when you write a novel, it'll take you weeks, months, years. And you start, and by the time what was the first chapter about? And you go back on your timeline. I do this all the time, even though I have notes and Post-it notes, and it takes so long. But then you write that poem, and you start it, and you could finish it in 1 minute, in 2 minutes, in 5 minutes, and you can encompass in that poem the past, the present, the future, right, in one page. And you're finished, and you say, whew, I wrote a nice poem there. I just find you can accomplish so much in one poem, whereas other art forms, it's not as simple. But to craft it and to edit it and to make it perfect, that's another story altogether. But to just write poem, like first draft in a journal or on your laptop, I find definitely it's gratifying.
Do you think, because I'm kind of combining the two things of what you just said. You said when you were younger, there was this like kind of classical poetry, but then later on, there's been an explosion, if you will, in poetry, and now there's much more availability. And I agree with you. I mean, I definitely see more poetry out there than I ever have before. And I have friends that have told me that they're poets. Me having written one novel in 4 parts over a period of time, I could only imagine how difficult that would be about writing a novel or, doing it over years, as you were saying. Do you think that poetry is possibly exploded in both the reader and the writers because our attention span and our time is so constrained? It's crazy because of phones we think we have all the time in the world, but really our attention spans, I feel, has definitely dropped. And I'm curious, as a writer and a consumer of poetry, what your thoughts are.
I have to tell you, very good. I've been thinking about that, and I've been talking about that with my friends, and I say people have no attention span anymore to finish a book and to begin it, to end it. I mean, I even find myself sometimes lagging. Oh, I have to finish this book. Why am I taking so long? And I get distracted and I go on my phone, but that's what it is. It's that you have to push everything aside. And with this age of social media, it's not easy. And people say, oh, I'll just read a poetry book. You read 1 or 2 poems and you can stop, put it away. I find more and more people are reading poetry because of that. I know many people that have ADHD, ADD that say they can't focus on a book, but poetry is easy for them. They can focus on 1 poem at a time and read it. So it's very true. I find that what you're saying is this day and age, it's hard to get people to read novels. But again, there's the e-readers and there's Wattpad. I don't know if you've ever heard about Wattpad. So there you can actually read novels on your phone in quick segments takes 1 minute, 8-minute read. So I find like everything is so fast paced that in order to finish a novel and to read it in a book format, it's more difficult. Whereas on your phone, you can read it easier now. I've read so many books on my phone. It's crazy.
Primarily only read on my phone because I don't have time. Or if I can't fall asleep, I'll read it on my phone. And my wife doesn't like me to turn the lamp on because she can't sleep with the lamp on.
That's it.
So it's just weird. Like you're right. Like it's easier. It's more accessible to read books these days. Yet the attention span is just not there anymore.
It's not there. I feel like it's not there, but I try to force myself. And now that I have the summer off, I said, okay, I've read 1 or 2 books already, but definitely with poetry, I find people are preferring poetry for those reasons. You can read a poetry book. So now it'll take you literally half an hour sometimes to read a poetry book and you're done from beginning to end. And you say, oh, I read a book. I accomplished something. But trying to read a 500-page novel, it's not easy nowadays, right? Everything is so fast-paced. And even to that point, I got a contract with a publishing company writing a 30K word count book, all right? So 30K, it's not a lot if you think about it, but it's still less than 100 pages. And I've been writing it on my phone, first time in my life on Google Docs. But let's say I'll sit outside and I'll just write it on my phone. So even as a writer, it's fast paced. I've never written this way before. I'm used to just doing it on my laptop, but with the phone, you can do so much.
I've only ever written on my phone.
Really?
And I've been doing it, on and off for like 6, 7, 8 years now. You write scripts on your phone. You can do everything on your phone. My problem is now that I'm not commuting into work anymore, my writing daily output or daily writing has tumbled because I used to set aside my commuting time to do all of my writing, work writing, personal writing, script writing. So like I trained myself how to write when I'm being transported around. And now I'm having a major problem retraining myself and being disciplined again. So there is a danger to learning on how to write on your phone if you're only writing when like you're commuting. So I do think it's good for writers to still have that discipline of sitting down at the computer. That's what I think.
No, I do that. I don't know. I usually sit on the computer, but lately, I don't know, I found the Google Docs and I've been working from phone to laptop, and then the laptop died. I said, oh, it just died on me. But I had actually written 1 book in a notebook. My Crush, a paranormal romance novel, one of my first novels years ago, I wrote it by hand. Is that crazy? I don't even know why I did that. By hand.
You're listed as one of the top 100 Canadian poets. I just want to know,
Well,
What?
was the Love and Vodka. You know that my book, okay, Love and Vodka.
Yes. No, I just want to know, what was that? What did that feel like when you got that news? You
When
must
I
have been
got
like, oh
that,
my God.
it was crazy because CBC did this voting for your best. They asked the public to vote for the top 100 books. And my book came in like 664 or something. And they got a message on it, on, I don't know, notification on Twitter. And I said, oh my goodness, what is that? I didn't even realize. I was pretty shocked with that. I was very happy to see that and to read that people voted for my book. Yes.
Congratulations.
It was thrilling. Thank you.
I'm wondering, when you do come up with a collection, I'm assuming that there are a whole bunch of poems and then you decide which ones make it in the collection. What happens to the ones that were tossed out, or how many are tossed out versus how many are kept? And the reason I ask that question is because I think that people who write or they want to write, they don't sometimes appreciate the value of the stuff that doesn't make it, that's also still part of the process, that you can write a lot that isn't going to work out, but that's all still an important part of getting better.
So usually what I do is I have another file, which I'll name it, garbage file or something, some crazy name. And I'll put everything in there and I will go through it later and I'll say, okay, maybe this is good. It's not. I literally will delete it if I don't like it. I'll say, okay, forget it, or I'll work on it a bit more. I have files of poems that I've not done anything with. And I say, oh, one day, just it's those poems that you'll say, one day I'll go back to them and I'll work on them a bit because there's something that you like about them. Or you just say, forget my ego, forget it. They're just not good. Sometimes it's that ego, the poet ego, you think, oh, this is good, it is good, but it's not. Sometimes it's just not good. They're not good enough. You just have to tell yourself, you know what? Forget about them.
Out of all the topics that you've written about, I mean, a lot of them have to do with love, but there's pain, there's romance, there's the erotic. Is there anything that, let's say, somebody who read your work, that they reached out to you that really, really resonated with you, where you realize that as a writer, you're not only expressing yourself, but that you are connecting to somebody else and somebody reached out with that connection? Do you have a memory of something like that?
Yeah, I get messages all the time when people tell me they read my book and they like one poem in my book. In Love and Metaxa, there's a few that reached out to me and told me which poems they liked and how they were touched by them, the connection. And I was so grateful that they actually reached out to tell me, because you don't even know as a writer sometimes. If you don't have people reach out to you or write you an email, you'll say, okay, well, was that any good? Or what do people think of my work, really? So I'm very touched by people when they write that. One time, what happened to me was really nice. I was doing a book signing and this girl came up to me and said, well, what are your books? What are your poetry books about? And so I write about love and heartache. Okay, well, can you just show me your favorite poem from this book? So she picked Your Ink on My Soul. That was my first self-published poem. And it was called 1979, that poem. So I said, here you go, you can read that. And everybody told me that that's their favorite poem of all time. So she read it and she came back to me and she was in tears. And I said, you're crying? Oh, wow. She said, yeah, that was so touching and beautiful. I said, thank you. I didn't expect that, but that was live. And to see somebody cry like that in front of me, that was the most touching, I'd say. And when I went to the Toronto festival was it 2 years ago, Word on the Street, one of my Twitter followers came and he bought all my books and he made me sign them. And he was such a sweetheart. And he was, your poems and your tweets mean so much to me. And it's so nice to meet you. And he bought all my books. I was, wow. And he made me a beautiful card and he painted me a picture. And I still have it and I cherish it. Another person on Twitter sent me notebooks and with a pen. It was really nice. And yeah, people reach out and, are grateful.
Yeah, I think there's a fly in my place. And I'm like Mike Pence during that debate when a fly landed on his head. All right. What were you going to say something, Rudy?
I was just, while you were beating away the fly, I was just going to say, it's got to feel good. I mean, what you've been able to accomplish in that these are self-published and you have people out there that are voting you on the top 100 lists in a major country like Canada. Yeah. And if that doesn't give you some of the validation as to, well, why shouldn't I put my own work out there? Publishing houses, for many reasons it didn't happen. I'm going to continue to do it because there's readers out there that love what you're doing. And at the end of the day, and you're getting some enjoyment out of it and writing it, and there's readers out there that are reading it. I mean, that's like a grand slam dunk, all wrapped up into one. Good for you. I mean, I'm working with a very good friend of mine who, really wants to do more writing wise, but has never self-published, is afraid to dip his toe in the water. I've gotten him to go onto Medium, and he's been publishing some of his poetry on Medium, and he's getting a lot of great responses. So I've been really encouraging him to just say, hey man, if no one wants to publish it, do it on your own. And I'm trying to encourage him. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts about when people come to you and say, I got rejected. Maybe I'll just leave it in the desk drawer. What do you tell them about your self-publishing journey?
Exactly. People always message me and questions like that all the time. So I always tell them to open a Word document and start writing. And whatever you write, whatever comes out, just keep going at it and don't stop to edit until you're finished and you feel like this is enough. 150 pages of poetry, and then go back. But I feel that when you self-publish your work, let's say you even post it on Medium, that's a great place to put your poetry, as well as WordPress, Wix, Blogger. WordPress especially is good because there's a whole community. So on WordPress, you can follow people who are poets. And that's how I started off. I started with WordPress, and I find that had a nice little community, and you can read each other's poems, comment on each other's poems, like them, and have the patience to read them. Because WordPress, you're going to say, oh, okay, now I'm going to sit and I'm going to read poems. I'm not going to read one-liners on Instagram. I'm not going to read tweets. I'm going to read a poem. So you prepare yourself for WordPress, and everybody who's there is quite serious. I find if you're going to sit and open a WordPress account and you're going to put your name on there as a poet, you're going to have poetry, right? You're going to share work with you that's touched you, and more narrative style poems, longer pieces. So I would tell your friend, open up a WordPress account, a blog, and start, sharing your work.
But you went beyond that. You actually published these books.
So I opened up my WordPress account, and the way it worked out with me is that my niece at the time was following my blogs and my poetry, and she was in her 20s, and she said, you know what, Aunt, you have to really put your stuff on Instagram, and you have to start, you should publish your work. And I said, oh, come on, forget it. I'm too old. I said, forget it. She's like, no, you have to do it. She took my phone, and this was in 2015, and she just opened an Instagram account for me. She took it from my hands and said, okay, there you go. Here's your Instagram account. This is what you're going to do. And she downloaded an app for me, and she said, just write your poems. And once I did that, I started sharing my poems on Instagram. I found this publishing company back then, and they were willing to publish my poems. And then I put together a whole manuscript that focused me, became so focused on putting my poems together in a book that I made those 3 manuscripts at the same time. So I had Your Ink on My Soul, In My Own Flood, and Love and Vodka in 2015-16. So I put those 3 manuscripts together, and I said, oh, I'm just going to self-publish. And that's how it happened, really. And I had all those people following me, because back then Instagram was becoming big. It was just starting. There was no algorithm. So the poetry community exploded. And it was a good time for me. And she just put me on there, and I gained all these followers. And then everybody loved my poems. And I thought, oh, they really like my stuff. Okay. And that kind of gave me the momentum to do more and to take all my poems from young, all of them. I had stacks and, on paper, and then I typed them up. And that's how those 3 books came about. This book that I focused more on editing, and you'll see the poems are a bit more detailed and have more form and technique, because they're edited by Alexandra Meehan. And the other ones were straight me, stream of consciousness, no editing.
This is something that I've been drawn to poetry. I've been drawn to literature. And when I was studying philosophy, everything is about analytic, about argument, about structure. And it wasn't until later in my studies that I discovered the existentialists. And I just absolutely fell in love with their work and their approach to valuing literature, and sometimes being philosophical through literature and quoting poets, because they realized that humanity and human existence and understanding the world can't be reduced to reason and logic. That is the role that art plays. I think Nietzsche said, if the world were ordered, art would not exist. And so I'm curious, since you are a poet, what role do you think poetry plays in culture? What is its significance? If somebody were to say, oh, you need to study science, or you have to study engineering or law, or I don't know, what are you going to do with that kind of thing? Well, there's a value to poetry. So I'm just curious, what do you find it to be in culture?
Yes. Well, I do, just on a side note, I love philosophy, and I even took philosophy courses and Jean-Paul Sartre and existentialism.
Oh, yeah.
And I was drawn to that. I found that fascinating, definitely. And I just, as a poet, I believe that as there's people that love sports and that will die for sports and will not miss a game. There's people that love poetry, will buy every poetry book and are obsessed with poetry. All right. So I find it plays a major role in our society for those people that love it and that will die for it and will go to bookstores looking for it. And it's for the people that are more artistic and it's not the whole world. It's only 11% of the population, I think, that actually buys poetry books. So it's not for everybody. But I think it has an importance in society in the sense that people will still look up to it and listen to the great poets and be in awe of it because they're not able to express themselves as poets do. So they will still listen and be, wow, that's so true what they said. Did you know Socrates said this? Or, Shakespeare said that. So people in general, the masses are in awe of that, but not everybody will buy their books and listen. You know what I'm saying? Just even in like when Joe Biden had the poets, Amanda Coleman say her poetry speech and everybody was in, wow, poet said something.
Oh my God, you're right.
Of course, it was a poet. Of course.
Everyone, she stole the show. Everyone was talking about her.
Yeah.
Nobody's talking about Joe Biden. Everybody was talking about the book. You're absolutely right. Oh my God, I almost forgot about that.
He made such an impact on society. And I thought, you see how poetry is important? But it's just people don't give enough emphasis to it. Politicians in general. Well, he did. Joe Biden did. So there you go. But I find there's not enough exposure to poetry, even though there is more now. Even in school, in classes, in high school, people look upon poetry and they're like, oh, boy, I don't understand a thing. What is that? They're not open to it in general. So whenever I say I'm a poet, oh, you're a poet? Half the people are like, well, I don't read poetry. I don't understand poetry. I don't know what happens to you, but happens to me a lot. People will not, even if they buy my book, sometimes I don't really understand half the poems, but they're really good.
There's something about, really good poems. I think what I love is that getting lost in reading them, that for a moment you almost forget that you're reading. It's like being a wave in the ocean. There's something about it just sweeping you away.
Or they take you, like you're listening to somebody's story, you're reading somebody's story, and then you can just you feel like you're there and you're part of it, or you can remember your own memories and look back and think of that. I find you can correlate so much, the connection, when you read somebody else's poetry. Recently, I read a great poetry book, Ada Limon, and I'm just blown away by her poems. They were just something simple as planting in her backyard and gardening, those simple poems that reflect on time. Because I find a lot of poetry reflects more on time and the present moment. So when you're reading it, you have to be there. You can't focus on what they're talking about. And they could be in one poem, they could talk about, when they were a child, they were married. I find that you could talk so much. There's so much in one poem, basically, that you can connect to.
Let's just say a listener, who's not going to publish any poetry, has never given it a shot. But let's just challenge that listener. I've got this stupid fly around here. It keeps landing on me. Oh my God.
This might be need to be an all video podcast episode, because watching you pull a Pence is pretty good. Write a poem. Wait a minute. Hold on. Let's write a poem right now.
Yeah.
Fly. Damn you. Fly away, fly. I shall swat you. Now die. How's that? Is that pretty good? That was pretty good, right? That's not, it was right on the fly. Oh, that's pretty good. That's it. That's the name of that poem. On the fly.
There you go.
Okay, it will be done. It will be done tonight.
Do I have talent?
And I'll put. Of course, you have talent. Oh, you're not asking me. You're asking the actual poet. Well, okay. Let's just say if we were to challenge a listener to tonight. Write a poem. What is it? Not for publication or anything like that. What is it that a person, in the same way that like going for a walk can do something for you, what if somebody takes that challenge and tries to write a poem tonight. After listening to this? What is it that they will learn from doing that activity? What do you think a person has to gain from trying to write a poem?
Well, I think that it's important you do writing prompts. If you want to be a poet, it's not just writing about your heartache and it's too boring, right? So you have to do writing prompts and take yourself out of yourself. And then I had a book back in university and it had about 100 writing prompts. And one of them was, let's say, pretend you're in a foreign city and you're walking through the city. What do you see? And you just have to write a poem about that. And you're just imagining things, imagery, right? Whatever you feel, hear, taste, your 5 senses, bring your 5 senses into that poem. So if somebody's listening to me now, I would say, go take a walk, which nature is always inspiring, and use your 5 senses and describe that walk without using the word walk. Things like that. Show, don't tell.
I agree with you. I would challenge a listener to write a poem about a fly. I mean, that's a writing prompt right there.
That's
I mean,
it.
seriously.
Write a poem about a fly.
I just end up doing Jeff Goldblum. Like that would be
There's so many roads you can go down with that writing prompt. That's pretty good.
But a writing prompt, I mean, it could be anything. You could say, write a writing prompt about when you were a child. I find writing prompts help you to write better. There's so many great books out there, or even, now there's the internet, so you can find tons of writing prompts, especially on Twitter.
I've always thought about poetry and was a musician, or at least like to call myself one back when I was in high school. I was really in a bunch of punk bands, and I was a terrible lyricist. The way I always thought about poems and poetry, I hear what you're saying about, hey, there weren't a lot of poetry books around, but music, really. I mean, when you come with rock and roll and the explosion and the availability of it, I've always thought, well, songs are just poems. It's just now put to music, and that another way to view poetry is looking at music lyrics. I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Okay, I believe that a lot. I believe that there's so many poets out there that are lyricists, starting with Jim Morrison, starting with Bono, Bob Dylan. They're storytellers. You listen to their music and you connect not only through their words but through their music and the guitar playing. And I find that that's the first person that I was attracted to, the rock poet Jim Morrison. I listened to his albums. I read the lyrics. I had his books. I love his poetry. He's one of my favorite poets ever. And he's really a rock star, but he's known for his poetry. And I connected to them on a deep level. I even typed them out in class. I just felt like there was something surreal in his poems. And he studied poetry. He studied the classics. He studied film. So he was gifted, and he's a special case altogether. But I really connect with rock music and with poetry and with lyrics. And when I write, I'm always listening to music, and I love it. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I find there's a big connection. You
should try the punk rock poet Rudy Salo. His stuff out there is really very low brow. It's really more like haikus, which are not real poems.
It's funny because my son is in the rock band, and he writes the lyrics, and he's a poet. He loves to write poetry as well.
I mean, something that I think is interesting just about poetry as an art form, that if somebody were to say, like, this is what I'm going to study, this is what I'm going to do, how it might be kind of hard to sell people on that. Everybody's worried. But then, and Rudy and I have done a couple shows on comedy, which I'll go ahead and put this in the same genre of art, that comedians or people who are working on that, if somebody's telling their parents, I'm going to go be a comedian, it might be frightening. But when you think about the structure of a society, if there is a society where there is a strong, like a dystopian society where there's a strong control, the first thing to go are the arts, which to me shows that they are actually far more valuable and they're more indicative. It's an expression of emotion, of freedom, of individuality, and allows us to connect with each other on levels where sometimes maybe we feel more vulnerable or afraid to, like the issue of love, like the issue of romance. I mean, it's something that's connecting with another love story or another heartbreak, I think can be extremely healing to either write about or to read about. And it will make you feel human. I think it's a value in and of itself.
Yeah, that's why people are attracted to romance novels.
Yes.
Right?
Well, so I was going to ask you, all right, so I was thinking about this, and I kind of want to parallel this with an author who's in the mystery crime genre, and her name is Jan Burke, and I had a chance to hear her give a lecture at Cal State Fullerton, and she had responded to the question of, are the mystery novels, like those John Grisham type books, are they really literature? And she defended that the entire mystery genre, actually, and crime novels and all that stuff, that it hinges on a concept of justice, and that is one of the reasons that it's valued, because when somebody is murdered, it is up to everybody else to step in for justice for that person, and that is part of the value. That's an underscoring idea, and I never thought about it that way. And I want to parallel it with the romance genre. How would you respond to a criticism of, does this count as literature, or what is its value? Yeah. What does it really give us?
That's a good question. But I would think that romance, because it's all about relationships, and what do we think about love, and how do we interpret sex, and what do you think about this man and the attraction? Do we like that person? Do we not? Is it true love? Is it our soulmate? I mean, all these questions, a lot of women ask them, but there's men that ask them as well. There's men that read my romance novels. Don't think it's just women. And I have reviews to prove it. So I know that men and women they want to know more about relationships. And if you read about romance and you read a book, that has all these, themes, then you learn a bit more about yourself as well. Every time I read a book about romance, I think, oh yeah, I understand what that person is saying, or I know what's going on here, and you connect with that. Because you also want to ask those questions and answer your own questions with relationships. Why did I get divorced with that person? Oh, how come I broke up with that? And then you see similarities, and then you can relate to them, I find. And romance is just part of our culture, and we're obsessed with romance and love and heartache and sex and all this. It's just in music, it's everywhere, in art. And it's a great escapism. I read somewhere recently a tweet somebody put, the best escape is romance novels from this crazy Twitter world or something, because you just don't want to watch the news anymore. You don't want to watch, you just want to sit with a good book and lose yourself in somebody's love affair. That's what as a young girl, I remember going and reading historical romances back then. I read everything, all the historical romances. And I was just 15 years old, and I just fell in love with all of them. And even like Philippa Gregory and all these other ones that are these recent writers, the last 10 years, it's about romance and love, but there's always something deeper and a connection. And you always want to find that connection between two people, because it's boring if it's just about sex. I'm not talking about that, so you always want to find some connection between the heroine or the heroine. Or
on that note, can we talk a little bit about the wanting? Because
yes,
I really enjoyed your book, and I remember being so in awe of the twist that you put on this erotic romance. Would it be considered erotic romance?
It is, or is it erotic romance? Yeah,
okay,
not erotic. Yeah.
So but I thought that the twist of it was so interesting, that the two main characters that you're reading about their relationships with others, and then.
So
I don't want to give any spoilers.
No, don't give it away, but I wanted to show two different relationships and the connections that they both had, and that the difference between a love connection and just a sexual, lustful connection, and to reflect on their past and how come they're like this, and what makes you make these decisions, and what's the cause and the effect of this, and is there such a thing as a soulmate? Because I did end the book with a question. I'm not going to give it away, but I wanted to just reflect on two relationships and not just two characters. So 4 in essence. As I started writing that book, I didn't even know where it was going, to be honest with you. I had no idea. Just from a poem. So I wrote a poem, and it was just a poem of two different people talking to each other in my head. And then from that poem, that's the prologue. Usually when I write, I don't really have outlines. I just go with it, see where it takes me.
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I was just thinking about how the genre can be quite static, where it's just, two very good looking people, they meet, there's an obstacle, and then they get back together. And then when I read The Wanting, I was just like, wow, she really did something amazing. Stayed true to the notion of erotic romance, but was just far more clever in talking about the connection that people can have, and didn't go by that structure. And I just really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And it's coming out again with Wild Rose Press. So that's exciting.
Cool.
Do you think the future is self-publishing? With Amazon and everything?
If you're able to promote, because you know what, even you're with traditional publishing, you still have to promote yourself. You still have to do all the whatever. Trust me, you're doing the same stuff. Because even I see that with the Wild Rose Press, even though I have a contract, I have to promote myself. I have to make my own little Instagram post. I have to go on Goodreads. You're doing the same amount of work, but at least you have a company behind you that is publishing your work. That's a difference, right? Because as you're still doing the same amount of work. Trust me, I've done both, and I see that, oh boy, you really have to work your butt off when you're promoting your book, whether you're self-published or traditional, unless you're Stephen King. The rest of the world, they're 24/7 on social media. I follow big authors, and I see they're on there promoting their books, just as I am.
You know what? I follow Stephen King. I follow him on Twitter. I follow Reddit. Stephen King is on Twitter, and he's on social media. He's very active. He's savvy as all hell. So even Stephen King is promoting himself.
It's so hard.
It's a lot of work. It's draining. You need to hire somebody just to do your social media. And some days you want to do nothing. I find it draining. That's the one thing, if I have to say, like, I'd rather be at home. I'd rather not go on there at all, but you have to.
Is the best way to approach writing, and really, I'm glad that you brought up Stephen King and like his success level, which is, let's just put that into the atmosphere, because it's untouchable.
Let's bring it to us.
Yeah, let's bring it to, the way I approach it is, I like to write. I need to have a day job. I need to, put food on the table. I need to put money into the kids' college funds. Student debt, my wife's student debt and everything like that. We got to pay the bills. That's not going to stop me from writing. I write because I enjoy it and I love it. And it's a passion of mine. If it turned into something that would lead to a little bit of money, great. But I think the most important thing is to actually have a day job that you enjoy. So the writing becomes a little less stressful and more enjoyable.
You have to do it with your heart and soul. Really, you do.
Do you have a favorite place to write? Like, is there a setting where you sit down and you're like, okay, this is my time. This is the writing.
I built myself a nice office, writing room about 2 years ago. So I come in here and I love it in here. The thing is, sometimes you want to go outside and get some fresh air. Yeah. You write outside, especially when the weather's nice. But I live in Canada, so it's freezing. So we're usually outside. And in the summer that I'm off, then I'm writing.
Well, you have a really active Twitter account, just talking about social media. Yeah. What is something that, because you are part of also a poets, was it Aerial Poets?
Yeah. So with my Twitter account, I try to go on there every day, pretty much active, tweet something here and there, just like to keep it going and to interact, to see my notifications, because sometimes I get messages from people that have read my book or photos. So I try to look every day. And I've created with my friend Alexandra Meehan, who's the editor, an Aerial Poets account. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I told her I have this idea. It's something that I really want to do. I want to help people and, give some inspiration to poets and just write an account about poetry. Just focus on that, not to retweet people, but just to give some kind of inspiration. And so we share it and with Alexandra, and we just go on it and find nice quotes from poets like Mary Oliver, Maya Angelou, Sylvia Plath, Anne Sexton. So we kind of find nice quotes that have to do with women and writing to inspire them. And then I have my personal account that I, just go on. And it's still a lot of work because every day you have to go on there and do something, right? So it takes a lot of your time. But I started my Twitter account way in 2009. Long time ago. When I opened up my blog, I started the Twitter account. So it's been a pretty organic, raw account, And,
I love it. It's great. And the Aerial Poets, I love it.
I don't retweet a lot of people. I just go on there, write something, look at my notifications, and then I'm off back to writing, because it takes a lot of effort to do, to focus on Twitter. So sometimes you don't want to get too distracted, which you can. You go down that tunnel of Twitter and then you're suddenly watching, all these memes and your time is gone. So
I end up on makeup tutorials.
Yeah, don't. Yeah, I mean, Gwen's been spending a lot of time on TikTok lately.
Oh, that's what I end up.
Yeah. No, that's another one. That's actually worse. That's worse.
It is, Gwen. Do you hear that? I know you're doing it to promote the pod, but maybe you could be writing.
I know.
What do you
should be writing? Well, it's always we should be writing, right?
I know.
I'm sitting having a coffee with my mom, and it's like, God, I should be writing right now. Stop thinking about that. Just be in the moment.
That's the thing with writing is that you never really, Rudy talks about never really taking a holiday, as a lawyer, but I think that writing is actually really similar. Like you don't really have a time off from that.
Your brain never rests. And I'm so active in my brain all the time that it's never resting. Only when I sleep. That's why I just pass out at night. My husband's like, oh my God, literally 5 seconds. Because my brain, I'm always thinking,
I'm curious, is there a poet that you can think of who is maybe underrated, like who should be more known, that someone's work that you really admire?
Recently, I finished 2 poetry books. One that I love was Tiana Clark and Ada Limon. Tiana Clark it was incredible, her poetry book. She's a young writer I don't know where she's from, but she's really good. Tiana Clark.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, she's a professor, I think, as well. And Ada Limon, well, she has her accolades. She's really well known right now. Other ones that have recent, right? Contemporary.
Oh, I'm just curious, just in your opinion, if you've read somebody and you were blown away and thought, gosh,
Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton.
What's that?
Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton always blew me away. Every time I read them, they're my number one. Especially Anne Sexton, she's my number one. Every time I read her poems, I'm in awe of her words. and her sentences and her structures. But she's the number one for me. When I was 19 years old and I went into a used bookstore and I just picked it up for 5 cents. 5 cents. I still have it. The Selected Poems of Anne Sexton. And I just, who is this? I had heard about her, but we didn't study her because you didn't really study a lot of women poets back then, not that much. And
isn't that interesting that now poetry almost seems to be, or the arts seem to be almost a feminine endeavor, but when you're studying it, it's all dudes.
Yeah, we were studying Wordsworth and it was just Walt Whitman. It was all just old Victorian era, especially like Dante. There was Rossetti. We did study Elizabeth Rossetti and a few, sonnets to the Portuguese. There were a few women that we did read, but it was mostly men, definitely. Yeah, there was Hart Crane. I remember reading in the Norton Anthology of Modern Poetry. There was all the modern New York poets. We read H.D., one woman or two, a few, but not that many. And I took one women's study. There was the first ever women's study class back then. And we were reading, nothing great. Jane Austen, and I don't know what we were reading. It was nothing great. And I was just not impressed that much. If we were in school now, it would be a different story. Yeah.
Something that struck me in your book that you included was at the very beginning. You had a quote from Charles Bukowski. It said, "You have to die a few times before you can really live." And I'm curious about what that particular statement means to you.
Okay, well, I love Bukowski. Love. I've read most of his poetry books and his novels. And I just find that you always when you reach rock bottom, you feel like I can't get up. I can't get out of bed, or I'm just, right now, I need to be revamped. I need something, a new energy. I need something, another path in my life. And that's when you get up and you're born again, as they say. I find like recently, I went to see somebody. I won't say anything more than that. And she guided me and helped me in meditation and in basically finding out what more can I do. And she said to me, "Do you know that you can paint?" And I said, "I can't paint for my life. I don't even know how to paint." And suddenly I bought canvases and I went just crazy and I started to paint. And I'm like, "Oh, they're not bad. People are telling me you actually know how to paint." I said, "Well, I don't know where it came from, but that's kind of what I mean, where you don't realize like your path, you go one path and then you're just done with people and with society and yourself. And you say, okay, I'm going to go down another path." Because Bukowski, when you read his poems, he could go on and on about a cup of coffee for 2 pages. But within that 2 pages and the cup of coffee, you found out, he had sex with his neighbor, the dog is barking. Like there's so many details in his poetry. And then it's like you go down another path again. So it just keeps on changing. And I find he inspires me as well because I like his poems. So I put that. You like Bukowski? You guys like him? You ever read?
A long time ago.
Okay.
Yeah, I've only read a little bit. I had a lot of friends in college that were big fans of his. I love the movie Barfly, which is loosely based on him. And I think I've been to a couple of the bars where he frequented just to kind of on like a little Bukowski tour. Okay. I clearly need to read more of it. This quote was so good. I wanted to get your thoughts as to why you included it.
Well, Christina, thank you so much.
Oh my God, the hour's gone already. That was fast. That was great.
Well, thank you so much. Good. I'm glad. I'm so glad that you joined the show. And you are our first poet on the show, which is very cool.
Thank you so much for having me. That was great.
Nice to meet you. Good luck with the book. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes so that you can get links to Christina's work. And if you get the Wanting, her erotic romance novel, or one of her collections of poems, take a screenshot of it and tag us. Good is in the Details Pod on Instagram. And if you would like to support the show, we're on Patreon, patreon.com/goodisinthedetails. We have all sorts of extra good stuff for you there. If you would like to become a sponsor of the show or advertise with us, or if you have any questions, goodisinthedetailspod@gmail.com. If you are enjoying the show and you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please scroll down to the bottom and hit that 5-star review. Let us know what you think. Okay, I hope you're still wearing your masks. Looks like we might still be in lockdown, but we're not hoarding toilet paper. That's good. Okay, until next time, bye.